For those who don't know, I am a massive SRPG fan. Don't let all the Persona videos fool you. Fire Emblem is my favourite game franchise of all time. I got into the series with Awakening, played all of them I could access, and appreciated them all, warts and all. Except for Fire Emblem Engage, which is where my problem starts. I did not replay that game half a dozen times, which I did for titles such as Awakening, Fates, and Free Houses, and therefore I've had an SRPG-shaped hole in my heart for a while. While Persona 5 Tactica sated me for a bit, I still yearn for some grid-based tactics. And then the first trailer for 100 Line Last Defense Academy dropped, and I was immediately conflicted. Last Defense Academy is an SRPG that is the brainchild of Kodaka of Danganronpa fame and Uchikoshi, writer of the Zero Escape trilogy amongst other things. While I respect Uchikoshi as a writer, despite bouncing off some of his games, I have far more conflicted feelings about Danganronpa and everything surrounding it. I got into Danganronpa early. Early. Like, they were only accessible via a Let's Play on the Something Awful forums early. While the first Danganronpa had been chronicled in its entirety when I read it, Super Danganronpa 2 had not. I remember going through what existed of the Something Awful Let's Play for it before hopping over to the Tumblr Let's Play, and then getting updated piece by piece for it like it was Homestuck or something. And just like Homestuck, Danganronpa is not a series I hold in high regard now that I am older and wiser. Don't get me wrong, there are some great moments in the first two games. For example, I think the opening arc of 1 is very good, and I still maintain my opinion that the ending of Super Danganronpa 2 is one of the most emotional endings of any game I have ever experienced. But for every high Danganronpa has, there are lows, low lows. There's this pervasive air of holiness to parts of the games, which, in of its own, isn't a bad thing, except for the fact that the cast is composed of high schoolers and written by 40-year-old men. Dark subject matters which should be handled with grace, like childhood sexual abuse, are instead written with the same over-exaggerated air as all of the skits in the game, which leaves a bad taste in my mouth. And yes, I know dark comedy is a thing, but in this case, it does not land. It wasn't just that, however. The older I got, the more I noticed the rot behind the things which charmed me initially about the games. The art, which initially attracted me due to its distinctiveness, began to alienate me in equal measure for its haphazard designs. The bombastic characters stopped amusing me when I noticed how static they were. Seriously, there's like 2 to 5 characters tops in each game that get any actual development, while the rest remain a bundle of stagnant tropes. And well, I can't talk about Danganronpa without talking about the fandom. All big fandoms are obnoxious with a capital O, so it wasn't unique in that regard. But by the time those PSA PowerPoints with Danganronpa characters slapped onto them started circulating around Tumblr, I checked out, not helped by the fact that I hated everything I heard about Danganronpa V3. And that's why I felt instantly conflicted when I saw the Last Defense Academy trailer, because it is a blend between a game I love and one I feel a bizarre mixture of nostalgia and disdain towards. The closer the release date got, the more I viewed Last Defense Academy with a feeling of trepidation, because I really wanted to play a new SRPG, but I also knew in equal measure that if I caved and bought it, I'd probably regret it. It had a free demo, so I caved. Instantly. In a sharp divergence from the Danganronpa I knew, the game starts with a whole ass 3D cutscene. Except cutscene is underselling it. It's low-key a movie. The main character, Takumi, who looks dumb but not as dumb as Aaliyah, spends the whole thing monologuing about his normal, boring life. Except there's nothing boring about it. Between the artificial sky and ominous sirens warning people to take shelter immediately, it's clear there's something extremely weird going on in the Tokyo residential complex where Takumi lives. And this is the point I started swearing because I can feel the game already sinking its greedy little claws into me. Of course, Takumi's pleasant, ordinary life comes tumbling to a halt when the TRC is suddenly invaded by some cutesy mascot critters that instantly proceed to murder everyone around them, with Danganronpa-like red blood getting splattered everywhere. Sirei, suddenly appears and offers Takumi an infuser, so he can awaken the power needed to defeat the invaders and save his childhood friend. At this point, I swear again, as guys, I love Persona and this is turning into Persona. More important than that, however, is that the player is given a choice, and this decision is presented with a lot of fanfare. Keep this in mind, as it will be relevant later. The choice is to stab yourself in the heart and fight, or run off and let your bestie Karua get torn into bloody chunks. In this case, it's not actually a choice at all, and after saving Karua's ass, Sirei suddenly teleports Takumi away, and after a trippy dream sequence, he awakens in a school with a bunch of other teenagers, and the player needs to talk to them one by one for the plot to resume. Danganronpa fans will probably recognise the situation instantly, as the exact same thing happens in every one of the games. If I hadn't just been brutally reminded that the Last Defense Academy is, well, Danganronpa, one of our not-so-lovable side characters then gives himself an orgasm while thinking about his sister. And yep, I am viscerally and vividly reminded why I don't like Danganronpa anymore. Still, it's a free demo and I really might as well finish it. After Takumi introduces himself to everyone, Sirei reappears in order to introduce us to the premise of the game. He wants the characters to defend the school they're in, the aptly named Last Defense Academy, from the invaders for the next 100 days. Because he gives an extremely wishy-washy explanation as to why, however, everyone refuses to, except for the students who are sociopaths and Takamaru. Takumi eventually cracks too, however, and joins them to fend off the incoming hordes of enemies, as he feels kinda bad about letting them get beaten up while he sits on his ass. This is where we get introduced to how standard battles work in the game. As the title alludes to, most battles are defensive, and your goal is to protect the barrier surrounding the Last Defense Academy from waves of enemies. Invaders come in two main types: weak enemies and strong enemies. Instead of a traditional turn-based system, the player instead has a limited amount of action points they can use per turn. This means you can attack with a unit multiple times per turn, but to balance that, after moving once, the unit gets a severe movement debuff. Weak enemies can easily be killed en masse to quickly gain something known as voltage, which can be used to unleash a devastating special attack, or the player can focus more on strong enemies, which reward the player with extra action points. The core gameplay loop is fun enough, but nothing revolutionary. Yet. It's time to move back to my plot recap, however. After a wave of invaders is cleared, a giant draconic monster called a commander arrives. These serve as the bosses for the game, and this is where I'd like to bring up my first actual criticism. I really hate the visual dissonance between the commanders and the generic invaders. It's like the directors wanted the invaders to be really cutesy since they thought it would be funny seeing these cartoony critters commit homicide, but then took every commander design out of a Final Fantasy villain's guidebook. It's visually incoherent and just reeks of sloppy, thoughtless design. and none of the plot surrounding the invaders really justifies that for me. But enough of that tangent. Darumi, one of the many resident dumbasses in your party, decides it's a good idea to Zerg rush the commander and instantly gets herself killed. Danganronpa fans are probably not blinking an eye until she rocks up again, completely fine, a grand total of 10 minutes later, because death is cheap in Last Defense Academy, and basically everyone can be resurrected ad nauseum in all but the most extreme of circumstances. And this is the second major combat gimmick of the game, specifically killing yourself. No, I am not joking here, and not even being hyperbolic. If a unit has low HP, they can bypass the voltage gauge by launching an overpowered suicide attack, taking down large swathes of enemies and dying in a blaze of glory immediately afterwards. In fact, the game goes out of its way to encourage this, and gives you more points the more of your units you deliberately fridge. And again, I swear, because shit, that's funny. That's so funny. Ridiculous ludonarrative nonsense like that is my catnip, and I can feel my restraint degrading by the second. And things only escalate from there, because Sirei, the game's mascot, the blatant Monokuma reference, gets killed off for real, day 2 out of 100. While Last Defense Academy still has plenty of homages and similarities for better and worse with its spiritual predecessor, before the demo has even ended, it's breaking away from Danganronpa's tracks. So yeah, anyway, I caved and brought Last Defense Academy, as you probably already guessed. The more I played, the more it subverted my expectations. The character who is seemingly Kirigiri and Chiaki's successor? Nope! They get removed from the narrative before the early game even ends, and everyone else is just fine for an extremely long amount of time, which allows Last Defense Academy to do something Danganronpa fundamentally cannot. And that is to let its characters grow. Most of this occurs during several arcs where Takumi has to convince a non-fighter to join the team. To do this, he needs to learn about their pasts and their personalities, and then engage in a persuasion mechanic that requires Takumi to say the right thing at the right time, somewhat like Ace Attorney Investigation 2's logic chess. This gives characters that would have remained static tropes in Danganronpa, such as Gaku, Shoma, and the Tsukimo siblings, a chance to actually change. And as they grew, my affection towards the cast as a whole grew too. Don't get me wrong, there were definitely still moments where I was painfully reminded that this is still a Danganronpa game, but by the time the 100 days are nearing their end, this ragtag group of assholes have become an eclectic group of friends, and it feels earned. The gameplay doesn't remain static either, with more characters, more enemies, and options such as strategic tools being introduced. The gameplay stays reasonably fresh for an SRPG that basically has less than 5 main combat maps. Between the intrapersonal conflicts, the constant threat of the invaders, and the ever-increasing oddities of the world, the Last Defense Academy's plot continued to keep me hooked too. By the time day 100 loomed, I wasn't regretting my purchase at all, despite the occasional bit of Danganronpa at its worst still rearing its head. Speaking of the end of the 100 days, however, I need to pause here, because this is the point where I need to get into heavy spoiler territory to continue my review. Like, heavy spoilers. If you haven't played the game to the end of day 100 and haven't seen anything about it online, stop this video, and if I've enticed you, try out the demo. It has some of the best and some of the worst moments in the game, and is a good gauge on whether you'd actually enjoy the overall experience. Now that that's out of the way, let's continue. Instead of building up to your final victory on day 100, things just get worse. Shikumi's crush/childhood friend is killed. Eito betrays the team, sabotaging their mission at the final stage and preventing the final strike on the invaders. It ends on a whimper, not a bang. And unable to accept this, for the first time since the opening hours of the game, Takumi gets a choice. Live out the rest of his days with his surviving friends, or use his last-minute power-up to travel back in time and do it all over again. As with the first choice, it's not actually a choice. Leaving his friends on, unbeknownst to Takumi, an incredibly ominous note, he returns to the very start of the 100 days and Last Defense Academy truly begins. Because now, your choices matter, and each of them leads to a different one out of 100 endings. That's right, 100. And I think this is both the game's greatest boon and greatest bane. The concept alone is amazing, and I really have to give kudos to the devs, as the scale of Last Defense Academy is genuinely massive. At the same time, as expected with an idea like this, there are some rather big flaws. The first issue is actually due to something I praised the prologue for, namely character development. Buoyed by Takumi's future knowledge, pretty much all of the non-fighters join from the start this time, and while it would be utterly tedious if you had to re-recruit them again, don't get me wrong, it makes the characters feel a lot flatter than they did in the first loop. While some get that sweet development again depending on the route the player goes down, it's variable at best. And of course, there's the dark side of having so many different routes. Most of them play with different genres of fiction. For example, there's slasher and comedy routes, which was the branch I stumbled down when I played my first time loop blind. Because of this, however, many of the routes just feel a bit disconnected from the story established in Timeline 1. Like the zombie slasher route has nothing, and I repeat, nothing to do with anything established in the first 100 days. It's its own thing, not a follow-up to the story that came before it, to the game's detriment. And then there's the second flaw, because naturally, in a game with 100 endings, some are better written than others. Much better. Slasher and comedy, for example, are just messy compared to the tight and deliberate narrative of the prologue. They were underwhelming, and while I'd wanted to do my first few routes blind, I lost interest midway through the comedy route and just looked up a walkthrough on how to get the ending, which is an actual conclusion to the established story. And God, it was good. It was so good. The Last Defense Academy 2 route reminded me why I fell in love with Danganronpa back in the day. It was beautiful. It was devastating. I cried like a little baby. And God, that's high praise. There was a reason that despite my apathy for Danganronpa as a whole, I still held the ending of Super Danganronpa 2 in my heart, and now Last Defense Academy has a special place alongside it. So, those are my thoughts on Danganronpa Fire Emblem. It's got flaws. The creators' ambitions definitely outpaced their skill at times, and there are fundamental issues with Last Defense Academy's very premise, as there always would have been with a game of its scope. At the same time, while it is still Danganronpa, Last Defense Academy reminded me that that doesn't have to be a bad thing. When the game hits hard, it hits so hard, and I don't regret buying it at all. It scratched my itch, and maybe it can scratch yours too. I'd like to thank everyone who watched the video this far, and if you enjoyed it, consider liking and maybe even subscribing. That's all folks. Later!